Turning now to the UK and its post-Brexit return to the international stage. When the leaders of the world's most advanced economies met for the first time in nearly 2 years earlier this month, they did it on British soil. Domestic policies are still high on the Prime Minister's agenda. COVID-19 cases are rising in the UK due to mainly the Delta variant, and there's an escalating diplomatic rift with the EU over Northern Ireland. But at the G7 meeting and the NATO summit that followed, Mr. Johnson also stressed the importance of Britain's foreign policy objectives. Curbing China's growing influence was high on that list.
I don't think anybody around the table today wants to descend into a new Cold War with China. I don't think that's where people are, but I think people see challenges.
Tensions with Russia, climate change and global trade were also major themes as well. Time now for the exchange and my conversation with the UK's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Barbara Woodward. I spoke with her earlier about the return to in-person global diplomacy and Britain's role post-Brexit. But I first began by asking about the crisis in Tigray and what will happen if the international community refuses to act.
I think, Zain, we're already seeing the consequences. The consequences are we have a man-made famine in Tigray. This is not drought. This is not locust. This is a result of the decisions of those in power. 350,000 people are dying for lack of food, and millions more are at risk of that because they can't plant because there is fighting going on. So we need a ceasefire. That's the first thing we need. And we need action, decisions at the top from those in power to stop the fighting and then to allow UN aid in, food aid in, and then we need to help the victims.
But Ambassador, what should be the consequences in terms of how the international community can help the people of Tigray by holding Ethiopia accountable?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. We do need to hold those accountable. There's been some progress. There's a joint human rights investigation going on between the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN Human Rights Commission, and we need to insist that the findings of that report are transparent. And then we need to see progress towards a ceasefire and political dialogue in order to move forwards and get away from this situation of conflict and famine.
I mean, is there anything, though, that the international community can actually do? I mean, we've seen the US, for example, impose limited sanctions on Ethiopia. We've seen President Biden send a special envoy to talk to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. That hasn't worked. We've seen all of these strongly worded statements. We've seen even a US senator travel to Ethiopia as well. None of that appears to have worked. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed doesn't appear to be listening to anyone. Are you hopeful that a ceasefire will happen anytime soon? And in terms of concrete steps the international community can actually take to hold Ethiopia accountable for these atrocities, what do you think they should be?
So I think the most important thing, as you say, is as soon as we have the results of the elections, that we have a ceasefire, that there is access for aid, and that political dialogue it gets underway, because there is no military solution to this conflict. Now, looking at the UN Security Council, there are a range of tools at our disposal through sort of sanctions type actions. But the key is to find those tools that will actually work. And you're quite right, it's been very difficult to date. We've had more than 5 Security Council meetings. Representatives of the UN, representatives of the African Union have all tried to engage with President Abiy. Indeed, my own Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, went to Ethiopia in January and spoke to him, underlined the importance of the continuing democratic transition. But so far, it has been very difficult indeed to make progress on that. And promises that we heard about Eritrean troops withdrawing in March, we're now in June, and that hasn't happened. So getting traction has been very difficult indeed.
I want to pivot and talk about the G7 summit that just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. We saw President Joe Biden, of course, Prime Minister Boris Johnson sitting down and meeting. How do you think the relationship between the US and the UK will change as a result of President Donald Trump no longer being at the forefront of global politics?
I think the G7 summit was a very welcome return to diplomacy in person, and some very warm words indeed from President Biden and from Secretary of State Blinken about the UK-US relationship. But the point of that relationship is that we can do things together that are for the benefit of both our countries, but also for the international community. And that's why we also very much welcome the very clear recommitment of the US to multilateralism. As you said earlier, they've made contributions to Ethiopia, but they're contributing to the multilateral system now, rejoining the WHO, strong players here at the UN and the Security Council. So I think there's a lot too that we can do together to tackle problems such as COVID and climate change. So a very strong relationship, I think, and very positive indeed. And President Biden, I think, had a very practical visit, also spent time with Her Majesty the Queen before going on to the NATO summit, so shoring up the security relationship between the Europeans and the US as well.
One of the sort of challenges that the US and the UK both share is what to do about President Vladimir Putin, what to do about Russia. Of course, as you know, there's been so many issues when it comes to disinformation, when it comes to cyber attacks, when it comes to the buildup of Russian troops at the Ukrainian border, when it comes to the Alexei Navalny crisis and that particular issue. What do you think, from the UK's perspective, is the best way to change Vladimir Putin's behavior?
Well, I think it's very positive indeed that President Biden and President Putin were able to have a bilateral meeting in Geneva just last week and talk about some of the areas where they can work together, but also to be very frank about the differences and look at the geostrategic importance of finding ways to work together. So there are areas where we need to cooperate around COVID and climate change, but also on wider security problems. But I agree with you. There are serious issues around the treatment of Alexei Navalny, the annexation of Crimea, which is contrary to international law, and what is going on in the eastern part of Ukraine, which we also need to address.
Can we expect a similar sort of sit-down meeting between Prime Minister Boris Johnson and President Putin?
I think we don't have anything like that scheduled on the cards just now, but it will be, I think, important to find areas where we can work together and have those sort of discussions. And although we haven't got a summit-level meeting prepared, we do work closely with Russian colleagues here at the UN Security Council in New York. And of course, my colleagues in Moscow, the British Embassy, are working closely on the relationship. And of course, my colleagues in headquarters in London have contacts as well. I don't think one meeting is going to change anything, but I think President Biden took a very positive step in reaching out to President Putin, and I very much hope that we'll be able to see some sort of progress as the two sides are able to discuss areas of potential cooperation and areas where we don't yet agree.